I didn't see this coming this morning. We got a rare interview with Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh sitting down, answering questions. And there's some gems from this interview. If you haven't watched the full interview, the Ravens just put it out a few hours ago. Highly recommend that you go watch that. It's only about 30 minutes. But I wanted to come on here and just talk about some things that stood out in this interview, some things I learned from this interview, and we'll also play some clips as well. So let's get into it.
Ravens flock. The flock rundown is the place to be.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.
What's up, Ravens fans? My name is Ryan. Welcome back to another episode of the Flock Rundown. So let's get into this interview, man. I thought this was super interesting. We don't hear from Steve Bisciotti very often. We used to hear from him almost yearly when he would do the phone call with the PSL owners, and he would always kind of bluntly answer questions so you get a little information, but you don't hear from him a ton. So to have this interview out today was very interesting and something that I just did not see coming. The first thing I learned in this interview takes it back a little bit to John Harbaugh's first season as a head coach when we were looking for a quarterback. Steve Bisciotti was all in on Matt Ryan, was basically telling Ozzie and Eric, you do whatever you have to do to move up and get Matt Ryan. From what I'm hearing, he's the only quarterback that is going to be great out of this class, and we need him.
I had taken over in 2004, and then Kyle Bowler didn't work out like we hoped he would, and then Steve McNair comes in, and then his body breaks down, and then 206 turns into a terrible 207, which leaves us with the 8th pick in the draft. Hire him, and they're saying that there's one first-round quarterback in that draft that year, and it was Matt Ryan. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't care what you have to give him. Like the whole Mike Ditka, Ricky Williams thing. Like, I don't care. I'm not so dug into the value of draft picks right now because without Matt Ryan, we're not going to be any good. And
because you have to have the quarterback.
Got to have the quarterback. So to me, it was like, stop talking to me about draft assets when there is no, I want a team asset, and that is everybody in the world is saying that there's one first-round quarterback. And it turned really out to be true because we're the ones that went back in and got Joe. Right. Cam said, this guy's got as much upside as Ryan. You shouldn't give up the world. We can do just as well with Joe. Yeah. And I was like, all right, you better. I don't know you very well. You better not be wrong.
You better be right.
This was cool insight. Obviously, Matt Ryan was the top quarterback in that draft coming out for sure. But really cool insight to feel Steve Bisciotti's desperation of like, hey, we need a franchise quarterback. You're nothing without a franchise quarterback. Let's go all in. I think they had the 7th pick originally. Let's trade up. We need Matt Ryan. And then the flip side, you got Ozzie and Eric who are like, no, I think we can move back, acquire a bunch of picks, and still get a guy that we think is going to be just as good in Joe Flacco. Now, you could argue, Matt Ryan maybe was better, but Joe Flacco got it done, won a Super Bowl. Matt Ryan's never won a Super Bowl, so it did kind of work out. Joe Flacco had a long, successful career with Baltimore, and they were able to move back in that draft class, acquire picks, and get a franchise quarterback. And Steve Bisciotti was dying to move up. And then that pressure on the staff member who made the call had to be insane. Steve Bisciotti's like, this better work. It better work out if you move back and take your franchise guy, because I want the franchise guy in Matt Ryan that everybody's sure of. That's what I want. But if you guys are going this route to acquire more picks and try to get a franchise guy, it better work. So that's a ton of pressure. I thought that was some really cool insight that I have not heard before. And it obviously did work out. I mean, the Ravens won a Super Bowl and are desperate to get back there. I sensed that from this interview too. If you watch this full interview, you'll know what I'm talking about, and I'll play a clip here. But the Ravens are dying to win a Super Bowl, man, and that includes Steve Bisciotti. He said, we're pissed off, and I like that energy. That's the energy I need from the owner, because that's how us fans feel down here too, man. Like, sometimes you look at John Harbaugh getting an extension and Steve Bisciotti and Eric DeCosta and the camaraderie, and you're like, okay, this is awesome. We're competitive. We do have a consistent organization. But there's a lot of fans that are like, hey, it's been 13 years since we won a Super Bowl. That's way too long. And it's really nice to hear from Harbaugh and Bisciotti say, we agree. We agree, and that's all we want. We want nothing else but championships.
I want to find a way to just to continue to improve. I feel proud about the things that we've accomplished, but unfulfilled. You feel like all we're really thinking about.
It's championships.
Yeah, we weren't talking about any of this other stuff.
We're pissed.
Yeah, we're talking about let's get this done. Let's accomplish what we want to accomplish right now.
How badly, I guess, do you want it for Lamar? Of course, for each other, but for him and he's been chasing that. He said that on the moment he was drafted.
Can't even put it into words. Can't even express it. It's like so deep. It's so deep inside. Such a desire, just such a determination to get it done. For really, you're right. For Lamar, for all the guys. I mean, every single person in that locker room, every single person in that building, Steve, all of us, we want that kind of success because. I mean, yeah, I think we're doing process, we're doing so many things right, but you know what? We haven't been able to be good enough when we needed to be good enough to take the next step to get that much closer. And even if we'd won the championship game 2 years ago against the Chiefs, we still would have had to win the Super Bowl. If we'd have beaten the Bills last year, we still would have had to beat the Chiefs and win the Super Bowl. So there are other steps. We've got to get good enough in everything we do so when those moments come the next time around, that we can come through, But we all want it for each other. And so we want it for Lamar. Absolutely, we want it for each other.
I don't look at Lamar singularly. It's I want it for Ronnie Stanley. Mm-hmm. I want it for Marlon Humphrey. It's like it just doesn't stop with Lamar. Lamar doesn't even stand out to me as who I'm rooting for, right? Like we've been doing this forever. I want it for Eric DeCosta. Has he technically won a Super Bowl as a GM? No. Right. So it's like, okay, I want that. Ozzie got a couple of them. I want Eric to get it. Right. So it's like, yeah.
We want it for the fans too, man. I want to see the fans dance in the streets like they were in 2013 and like they were in 2000.
I don't like waiting 12 years.
No.
And yet I'm respectful of the fact that I've got partners downstairs that still don't have one. Impatience is good for you. I think it's healthy to a degree because all of us still feel it, and if I had burned through 4 coaches, then it would be completely different because it's like, okay, now let's see what you can do, and now let's see, I know what we can do.
And when we win it, we're going to start all over again and try to do it again.
Yeah.
Steve Bisciotti stays behind the scenes a lot of the time, and that's why it's so cool to get some access into him because he's usually pretty blunt and honest. I've never really heard from Bisciotti. Obviously, he's not going to say everything to the media or something that he knows is going to get released, but he doesn't really, play the dance too much. I don't think he's in the media a lot like Harbaugh is. Harbaugh's he's asked questions all the time. He's very trained on being like, okay, this is what I'm going to elaborate on. This is what I'm going to kind of brush off. We're not talking about this right now. He's constantly being asked questions. And Steve Bisciotti is not. So when he does get asked questions, you get a lot more honesty and transparency. And when they were discussing the John Harbaugh extension earlier in this interview, Steve Bisciotti was saying that John Harbaugh has a ton of distractions. He's the head coach who is getting criticized and is basically the face of the franchise. A lot of blame gets funneled to him, whether it's deserved or not. And he admitted that some of it is deserved. And I thought that was super interesting too. Obviously, that is the case. Nobody's perfect. Everybody's going to make mistakes. John Harbaugh makes his mistakes. We all know that. There's half the comments, every video I drop about Harbaugh says they want Harbaugh gone. So, he's fairly criticized, sometimes probably overly criticized, but that's because we want to win so bad. And when we see some mistakes, we call it out. And Steve Bisciotti said that he sees the same things. He hears a lot of criticism. Most of the time, he brushes a lot of it off because he disagrees with it. But when he does hear some criticism about Harbaugh that he does agree with, he goes to Harbaugh and talks to him about it.
I know what he's going through because he's the face of the franchise, and he's going through these decisions. He's being questioned and criticized and everything else. And so I take it seriously. It makes me mad when he's unduly criticized. If he's criticized and I agree with it, I kind of have to work my way into telling you that I agree with the criticism.
And you're good at it.
And
You do
I'm-
a good job.
Yeah, it's like a sharp knife, not a butter knife.
It's quick. It's a quick shot. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just I love feeling like at the end of the day that I contributed to his north. I know what he wants. I know what he wants to accomplish. Can he get distracted sometimes? Yeah, because there are distractions all around him. There's no distractions around me. So I think it's my opportunity to kind of like pull him back and remind him. I'm not telling him to be somebody. I'm reminding him that he might be a hair off of being what he wants to be when he wants to be.
Another interesting thing they were talking about is Lamar Jackson and the risk that the franchise took to go a different direction and pivot from what everyone else in the league was looking for at quarterback. You know, they knew Lamar Jackson was insanely talented. They also had an idea that he would slip in the draft and that they would be able to get him in the first round. And every other team was looking for the next Rodgers, Manning, Brady. You know, they weren't quite moving all in on the mobile quarterback. And the Ravens knew that it was a risk to pivot there. We've heard them talk about this decision before, but we got a little bit more insight from Bisciotti and Harbaugh on just the thought process of building an offense around Lamar and what it took as an organization, not just Lamar. Bisciotti made a point in here that really stood out to me. He says, if we failed at this and Lamar would get blamed for failing, it's not Lamar's fault. It would be the organization's fault for not helping him and doing it the right way, because they got to build the offense around Lamar. Lamar has the tools. Lamar is the great player. We need to support him. And I feel like they may have, not in offensive design at first, but with weapons, I feel like they may have let him down early in his career. It is what it is now. We're obviously very stacked with weapons, in my opinion. We've drafted multiple first-round receivers. We signed Derrick Henry. We're adding free agents as much as possible. We got to beef up the trenches. Definitely got to beef up the trenches and make the guard play a little bit better. But other than that, they are supporting Lamar now, which is weird because now we have Lamar signed to his mega deal, and we're now supporting him with draft picks and free agents. But earlier in his career, we weren't stacking weapons all around Lamar. The offense wasn't that great. We drafted Mark Andrews, so that helped a lot. We always had a good running game, but from a receiver standpoint, we didn't have a lot of weapons. I guess you did try and go get Hollywood, but it didn't work out tremendously. So I would say the organization kind of slacked a little bit early on in Lamar Jackson's tenure of putting a ton of weapons around him to make his job a lot easier. But it was just super interesting to hear them talk about the decision to go this way.
I mean, Lamar was not the top-rated guy.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a different kind of year because there was a bunch of quarterbacks that year, and we had the conversation about Lamar in the draft meetings all the way through on the phone. How many times did we talk? Yeah. But we didn't want anybody to know, and we did. We were in the draft meetings, and the conversation kind of came back around, and it ended up being, can we build an offense around Lamar Jackson? Can we do it? And we decided that we could and that we'd give it a shot. But that wasn't the end of it because we still had to get him. And I remember the draft day on that one. I had stepped out because we had made the pick of Hayden, and still Lamar was kind of in the back of everybody's mind. And I'd gone out to eat like an ice cream cone or something, try to relax. I come back in and they're buzzing. Steve's buzzing, Eric and Ozzy are buzzing. And he looks at me and I'm like this, and he goes, Lamar. That was the conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we went back and got Lamar, kind of like we went back and got Joe.
And made just what you said, building a team. Can we build an offense around Lamar? They wanted him to work out as a receiver at the combine.
Right. And so it's
Not bad for a running back.
Yeah, not bad for a running back. Exactly.
If it failed, we failed. It wasn't that Lamar failed. So the minute we're making an out of the box, again, how out of the box was it? I just thought, well, it's going to succeed because we're going to mitigate the risk. That's the whole point of taking on risks, is having confidence in your partners that you can mitigate it and bring it down to almost no risk at all.
And really, what was the risk? Like, I remember looking back and having this conversation. It's like, okay, everybody was chasing the prototype kind of quarterback, which was Joe, who was very successful, but also the Mannings, the Bradys, and those guys. Everybody wanted that type of a quarterback. Well, how many of those guys were there that won Super Bowls? They're so hard to find, and they were so overvalued that it became kind of impossible. Those were actually the unicorns. Now you've got a guy that looks a little different in the style of play, yet he's super talented. So you could look at the way he played and you say, this is a very talented quarterback, a very talented football player. He's a value because of that. It just is kind of different than what other people are looking for, they see. So our opportunity to get him where we were drafting kind of went up. So it really wasn't a big risk that way. It was just a different kind of a choice.
So these are some main highlights that I took away from this interview. I thought this was a super interesting interview. I love hearing from Steve Bisciotti just because we don't hear from him very often. And usually when I am watching a Steve Bisciotti interview, it's honest. You know, he's not afraid to answer a question. He doesn't dance around it too much. But let me know what you guys are thinking about this. What's your takeaways from the interview? If you haven't watched the interview, go watch that interview. I think it's a great 30-minute interview, not too long, but jam-packed with some information, and there's some gems in there, man. So let me know what you guys are thinking. As always, I appreciate you tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.